All right. Welcome everyone to the HCP Heritage Capital Projects Fundamental Workshop. Today, we are going to go over all of the basic rules and standards for the Heritage Capital Projects program. We will not be diving into the application form or anything like that. We've got some future workshops planned for all those additional details. So for today, we'll just start with the fundamentals. My name is Jay Barriston. I'm the Director of Heritage Outreach here at the Washington State Historical Society. And actually, I think one of my slides does have my intro as information on it. So let me just go ahead and start sharing screen. All right. Everybody see that okay? Here we are for our Heritage Capital Projects Fundamentals Workshop. Here is my contact information. I am the manager of the Heritage Capital Projects program. I've been at this Historical Society about 5 years. So this is the third cycle I will have been involved in as staff. And I didn't put a slide up for David, but I wonder, David, if you might hop on for just 1 second and introduce yourself to my coworker here at the Historical Society, who also works closely with the Heritage Capital Projects program.
Sure. Hey, everybody. I see a lot of familiar names in the chat. I'm David Sinjak. If you don't know me, I'm the Capital Projects Coordinator for the Historical Society, and I work primarily with the reimbursement side of the Heritage Capital Projects program.
Thanks, David. Yeah, he'll have a lot more to say and discuss when we get into the contracting phases in the future. So, all right, moving right along. The purpose of the Heritage Capital Projects program is to provide public access to history. So these are state dollars that are allocated to history projects across the state to support their capital needs for the facilities. So something important to know is that Heritage Capital does not support exhibits. It feels a little strange because the exhibits is often where organizations will provide that public access to history, but it is for facilities only. So as I like to say, it's kind of everything around the exhibits we can support and fund, which includes, obviously the structure, lighting, carpeting, all that stuff around the exhibit, but it does need to be related to the facility itself to be an eligible project. And we'll get more into that in a minute in some future slides. A little bit about the program. It was initiated in 1995. We've provided over $116 million of funding across the state. These are the statutes in state law that authorize the program. As far as the schedule, this grant opens once every 2 years because it does follow the state biennial budget, which means every other year. So this year, you are applying in 2026 for funding in 2027 to 2029. As you can see, the grant spending note right down here. This is really a long-term planning grant because it doesn't respond to emergency building, situations. It really is a capital grant that you need to plan far in advance. After you submit your final proposal or your full proposal, it will be literally a whole year until you're able to spend grant funds if you're awarded. So it is a long timeline, and then it is only every other year that you can access that. So it really does require folks to plan ahead and incorporate it into their project as you move along in your planning. So the final application will be due in June, as you can see there, and then we've convened a panel an advisory panel to review the applications. They will score them and rank them, and then we submit that list up to $10 million to the legislature, and the funding is not guaranteed until the legislature adopts that list in the Washington State Historical Society's capital budget, and then no work can start until the budget starts. We can start spending on that state budget, which is July 1st of 2027. So there's some process notes. Here's our list of dates for this round. You can see we're right here on the second line in the fundamentals workshop. This is a two-stage application. So the first stage, which is your eligibility review, is due on April 10th. And then the full proposal will be due on June 5th. There you can see those two things bolded. And this is all in the guidelines document. So this exact list of dates is listed right at the front of the guidelines document. So don't feel like you have to scramble to write this down. Speaking of the guidelines document, every cycle we've done some sort of moderate revisions to how we organize the information. The rules don't really change, but we try to update some of the language or the descriptions to make it a little bit easier to use, and on the application form as well. So this year we've kind of rearranged the information in both the application and in the guidelines into three main categories, which I'll show you on the next slide. But the purpose of the guidelines is still to walk you through each section of the application and show you the rules relating to that section, and then walk you through the application form related to that section. And then the biggest change is that we've reorganized and weighted the criteria, which I will walk through in a moment. So the three main sections that we've reorganized information into are organization, property, and project. You see those highlighted there, number 3 through 5. So it's all the same information. We're just trying to make it a little bit easier for you to follow, and make it easier to process the application and read through the guidelines. The guidelines are really designed to be literally on your desktop right next to you as you're going through your application. Fill it out this way. Here's some ideas for this. Gives you a little bit more detail than we're able to include in the form. So I recommend that you take advantage of that. So as I mentioned, we have some more in-depth workshops coming up. So we will do a more in-depth and application walkthrough for the eligibility review. The eligibility review is designed to help you determine whether the Heritage Capital Projects program is the right fit for your project. Are you an eligible organization with an eligible project? Do you have long-term site control? We do need that confirmed before you proceed. And then give us a general summary, timeline, and budget of your project so we kind of get a sense of what you're thinking and what you're planning. So this is the limited amount of information that we are wanting in that stage 1 review. David and I will review it. No problems. We'll forward you right on to the full proposal. If we see some issues like you have a long-term lease and it happens to expire in 2040 instead of 2042, we're going to ask you about that, and we're going to figure out how to get that extended or find some other solutions so that you are eligible. And we'll talk about that 13-year time horizon here shortly. Then we will have on April 30th, in-depth workshop about stage 2, which is more traditionally what you think of as the full grant proposal. So more information about your organization, such as financials. We require a sort of signed and approved commitment from your governing body, whether that's a board of directors or a city council, depending on your organization. A detailed scope of work, which is kind of the core of your application, a more detailed project budget, and then a proof of what you're using to pay for your match, what money you're using to pay for your match expenses, and then a variety of narrative questions. So that's kind of the bulk of the application. So the sooner you can get the eligibility review done, the sooner you can start work on all of these pieces as well. All right. Well, we're going to dive right into the fundamentals of HCP to help you determine to share that information with you and hopefully get you on your way to working through the eligibility review portion of the application. The first question, is my organization eligible? Here are the eligible applicant types that our program accepts. So a local government, this could be a city, a town, or a county. A tribe, this can be a nonprofit that the tribe runs or a tribal government. Nonprofits in Washington State more broadly, and you must have that federal 501c3 designation. If you do not have it, you are not an eligible applicant. If you're in process, we require you to at least have it by the time that the panel is reviewing applications. And with the way the IRS processes those, it's really an unpredictable timeline. So typically we say to folks, if you don't have your 501c3 designation yet, you're maybe not quite ready for this program because it is a pretty involved and documentation heavy program, and there's a lot of work involved in this, and it's better for an organization to be more established to take on a project like this. Public Development Authority, or PDA, as they're known, and then also ports, which are typically, quasi-governmental organizations. All right, another big fundamental of heritage capital projects is that you must have site control. Because this is a capital project for a facility, you have to have site control of that property. In order for the state to invest in that property, they need reassurance that you will hold on to this property, you're not going to sell it, and that you will be able to continue providing that public access to history past the grant period to continue benefiting the public. So property ownership is one. You own the property outright, or a long-term lease. And because we have that 13-year monitoring period, which I'll talk more about on the next slide, essentially we require your long-term lease at the application stage to be no less than 13 years past 2029, which is when the grant program, this funding cycle ends, June 30th of 2029. So June 30th plus 2029 plus 13 is June 30th of 2042. So you need to have a very long-term lease. You need to be holding a long-term lease through at least 2042 to be eligible. And subleases, unfortunately, are not sufficient. You need to have a lease with the property owner themselves. All right. 13-year monitoring period. So you must, after you finish your project, you must maintain the site for a period of 13 years and maintain public access to history. Again, as I mentioned, this is a way for the state to protect their investment into this project, to know that the public will be able to benefit from these state invested dollars. So you maintain site control, means you can't sell the property. Maintain the physical property, so keep it up. We don't want things falling into disrepair. Which includes following historic standards in the future. So if you have a historic building that you're applying for, you need to keep the historic standards. You need to meet the historic standards as you continue to maintain and care for the property. And then, as I mentioned, continue providing public access to history. So programming, interpretation, all that good stuff. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about projects. Grant dollars support capital or facility is another way to say that, costs only. And these are kind of the four main categories that we fund. So new construction, this can be, this is typically in the form of a new history museum, a new building that is dedicated to history, interpretation, and programming. Existing building rehabilitation can be a historic building. But it could also be a more recent building that needs a major upgrade. For instance, a building built in 2000 but needs an HVAC upgrade to protect collections or storage, or even collections within exhibit space. That is a perfectly eligible project. Any rehabilitation, historic or non-historic, again, as long as there is that history component of being a historic building or interpreting history as a museum. We also fund architectural or engineering design work. So sometimes people apply, depending on the stage of their project, for this, for design to be their grant, but often people will use this as part of their match. They've got their plan. Maybe the design work has already happened and can't be an eligible grant expense, but you can use it as your match if that happened in the past. So again, if you want to chat specifics about your project, I'm happy to help you navigate through that. And then property acquisition is the last category there. So if you are purchasing a property or if you are gifted a property, that can be in play in a grant project and budget. Okay. Grant requests may be between $10,000 and $1 million. There's a couple of we'll talk more about the matching in a moment. But for smaller requests of $100,000 or less, you can have any ratio of match, cash or in-kind match. And this comes in really handy when you have very large in-kind donations, such as donating property or a professional donating their work, something like that. And we allow that for small projects. For larger projects of over 100,000, only up to half can be an in-kind match. And we do this because for large projects, we need to know that there's enough cash that you have in order to make the project happen. With smaller projects, you can kind of manage through those cash expenses a little easier, but with large projects, you really have to have sort of the cash flow to make those happen. So the in-kind exception for all in-kind match is only for small projects. For everyone else, it's up to 50% of your match can be in-kind. Okay, this is a big one. Grants are reimbursement only for expenses that happen after the date you sign your contract. The state of Washington does not advance funds, nor do they reimburse for previous expenses. So as many years as we do this grant program, there's always someone who kind of doesn't understand this, but you have to spend the money first and then be reimbursed for it, and only expenses after the grant contract is signed are eligible for reimbursement. We also have a fairly robust uh, process for reimbursement. There's a lot of documentation required. So you need to document what you paid for and how you paid for it. So you need to keep very good records of all of your expenses so that you can submit them for reimbursement later. And I'll also mention that, for most projects, we do reimbursements throughout the life of a project or a contract. We don't expect you to spend, you know, $500,000 and then wait till the end to get reimbursed. We try to work with grantees to develop a good cadence of reimbursements throughout the project that works for you. So you've got that cash flowing back in to your organization when you get reimbursed, but that is, not so frequent that we're doing a lot of extra processing on our end as well. Okay, let's talk about match. So in the RCW, it specifies that Heritage Capital project dollars can fund up to 33.33% of an overall project. So that means that this program has a 2-to-1 match. For every dollar that you receive in grant funding, you must spend two other dollars from some other source, whether that's income that you've earned through programs or rentals or donations from your members, or a grant from a local source or a federal source. Importantly, you cannot use other state dollars to match the Heritage Capital Projects program. So if you have recently received or are pursuing grant dollars from the Department of Commerce, Recreation and Conservation Office, Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, any of those grants cannot be used as match. And you also cannot apply during the same biennium for those grants either. So we do ask in your application if you are applying for the same project. So if you have questions about that, let me know. Another big source of state dollars that we see is called community projects, which is basically legislators picking specific projects that they want to support directly from the state capital budget. And there's usually a pretty long list of those each budget. So those dollars, if you've received a community project grant essentially through your legislator, it would be routed through the Department of Commerce. Those also count as state dollars and cannot be used as match. So we try to make this program as flexible as possible. As I said before, you cannot start spending any grant dollars until the date your contract is signed. But we do allow you to go back up to 6 years to find your match. So if you replaced your roof 2 years ago and you're like, man, I really wish I could have used that as a match for this future grant I want to apply for, good luck or good news. If it was within 6 years of the first day of the biennium, you can do that. So we've got July 1st here is the first date of the day of the biennium, and counting back from there is July 1st of 2021. So expenses that you've incurred for the facility from 2021 up to the first day of the biennium can potentially count as match if they're, of course, eligible expenses and you have the proper documentation. Starting when your contract is signed, an expense that you spend can be match or grant. It doesn't matter. We just want to keep that 2-to-1 ratio always correct. Sometimes we'll run into situations where people will use exclusively past expenses for their match, and that's fine. And then all of the match is spent already before the contract is signed. And then the contract gets signed and we're able to just start reimbursing grant dollars right away because you've built up your match, of course, after properly being documented. So if you have any questions about whether a past expense is eligible or the timing of it, please let us know. We're happy to help. I would say probably the not trickiest, but one of the things that we talk about a lot with applicants is how do you kind of form a grant project proposal if you have multiple property facility investments that have happened over this past 6 years and the ones that you're pursuing for grant funding in the future. That's kind of a spread out project. And so it takes a little bit of finessing to give put together a proposal, a cohesive grant proposal that perhaps includes all of those elements. If you've got a long timeline that you're drawing expenses from, and we can kind of help with that. Another really important thing to note is that anything you're planning to count as a past expense as your match does need to be included in your proposal, your description of your project. So you need to write out the scope of work and all the details of it in your application, even if it's already happened. If you're using a past expense as match, it needs to be included as that whole project that HCP is supporting. So that can get a little confusing because if work has already happened, why would you describe the scope of work of what you're going to do? No, it's the scope of work of what already happened and what you're counting as your match of that 66.67% that you are putting toward the project. So it needs to be captured completely in the application. All right. Unless you are a sovereign tribal government, all applicants are required to follow all applicable state laws. If you are using state funding, you must follow state laws. That includes consultation with tribes and DAP, prevailing wage laws, which can get a little intimidating for folks, and then high performance public buildings, or LEED. The LEED is only for larger projects, and most of our applicants don't fall into that. But if you have a large project, reach out and we can talk through that. As in previous or last year, the State Historical Society will be taking the lead with consulting with tribes. We have a tribal liaison on staff, and he and I just had a meeting about this a week or two ago. So we will be doing that. And that is why we ask you for information about ground disturbance in your eligibility review. It doesn't have to be super detailed, just a quick summary of, are you just replacing your roof and there's absolutely no ground disturbance, or are you digging out for a new foundation and there will be some considerable ground disturbance, or trenching for utilities or something like that? Let us know so we can give good information to our tribal partners. Applicants are still required to consult with DAP directly. The DAHP is the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. So you'll need to submit a project worksheet to them, and so that they can review and make sure that no historic properties are being what they call adversely affected. If you're following historic standards, which you should be, there should not be any problems. DAP may have some comments here and there about the work you do, but by and large, we hear from DAP that our program is designed to preserve history, and so they don't run into very many of our grantees that are not looking to do the right thing and already wanting to follow the preservation standards. Their reviews get trickier when it's other types of funding that aren't focused on history. Okay, I want to spend a little bit of time on the criteria restructuring I mentioned at the very beginning. We went back to the establishing language of the program, and in this first section, it says, Washington has a rich heritage in historical sites and artifacts that have the potential to provide lifelong learning opportunities for the citizens of the state. And something that we've, I think, struggled a little bit is to convey what public access to history means, and to have applicants convey to us what public access to history they're providing. And so we tried really hard this year to update the criteria and update the accompanying narrative questions to better understand what that is and how an applicant does it. So we also did some re-weighting of the categories, and I'll show you that here. So you can see last cycle's sort of criteria categories. We noticed that about 60% of the points were going toward planning related criteria. And we felt that was pretty imbalanced. Planning, of course, is very important, but we also feel that community value and that access to history is also important. And so we reweighted them into these three buckets that will be scored. The scores will weight evenly across the three. And we retitled Project Purpose to Lifelong Learning. We're trying to find language to help convey this concept a little more clearly to you as applicants, but also for you to convey your work to us and the panel more clearly. I want to note that in the guidelines document, we went ahead and tried to very clearly articulate what high, medium, and low scores would be under each of those three categories: lifelong learning, community benefit and value, and project planning. So it's all in there, and that's what the panel will be using. Obviously, within each sort of range depends on what you've provided in the details of your application. But we wanted to try to clearly articulate this to you as applicants, and also to have that same information be what the panel is using to review and score your applications. So I would encourage you to spend some good time in here as you are working through your application to try to respond to as much of these bullets as you can. And here they are in sort of summary. Lifelong learning is interpreting and preserving history and having history-focused programming for the public at your site. Community benefit and value. We kind of split this into two. One is community partnerships and public support for the organization, and we ask actually about both of those in separate questions. But then also the tangible sort of community benefits of the project. Are you making the building more accessible? Are you making safety upgrades? Describe that tangible benefit that the community will see. And then, of course, project planning, demonstrating your readiness to proceed with the scoping, budgeting, and then the long-term stability piece as well. Okay, well, how do you get started on your eligibility review, stage one? I will note that the guidelines is your first place to start. We work really hard to try to put as much information in there as we can, which is why they're a little bit long, but hopefully you can navigate to the sections that will be of most usefulness to you. And you can find those guidelines. It's a little small, I realize here, but on this right-hand menu on the website, and then in the picture, kind of the scrolling slideshow, there's another link to the guidelines. Or you can just type in washingtonhistory.org/HCP dash guidelines, and that will get you straight there. It's our little quick link. But this website is, or this landing page is /HCP. So you could get there pretty quickly. And then once you're ready to start filling out an application, you'll need to go to our grants portal, which we call the Heritage Portal. And you can see the link here in the right-hand menu and as well in the slideshow down below, or that link, washingtonhistory.org/portal will get you there too. This is what the portal landing page looks like. We only accept applications digitally through the portal, so this is required. And essentially, it is a system of interconnected profiles. There's organization profiles, there's user profiles, and then there's property profiles, and then the application form is connected to all of those. So each user should register their own account. It gets very confusing for us when multiple people are logging in through the same account. So we really appreciate if each person who needs to access the application or make edits creates their own account with their own email address. And then once I've connected you on our end to your organization, every person who has a login connected to that organization can access the application form, make edits, in the future access grant reports, reimbursement reports, status reports, all that good stuff. So it's a system with its challenges, but it's actually quite handy that it has so many. It can connect multiple people to shared information. So this button right here is where you can create an account. If you know your organization already has an account in the system, I can send you a short link so you don't have to fill out the org info. Again, since we already have that in our system. It's not here on the landing page, but if you want to email me, I'm happy to send that to you. As I mentioned, each user should have their own account. And I'll also note that it can take up to 24 hours to receive your confirmation email because I have to manually connect you into the data for your organization. We don't want sort of folks getting accidentally connected to the wrong information and have any privacy issues there. So I have to manually sort of review your information, connect you to the correct organization, and make sure that that's the right connection. I will also note that the confirmation emails come from a very spammy looking email address. So please check your spam or junk mail folder. If it's been a couple of days and you haven't gotten your confirmation, shoot me an email. Of course, check spam first, then shoot me an email, and I can let you know what's going on. If I missed the registration, it didn't come through, or something else is going on, we can get you set up in the system. Okay. Well, I was aiming to get done by quarter till, which I ended even earlier than I anticipated. So we have plenty of time for questions. I would like to try to keep the questions a little bit more broad about the sort of rules and fundamentals of HCP rather than getting too deep into specific project questions. If you've got real specific questions about your project, then it would make sense for us to kind of have a quick meeting via Zoom, just one-on-one, so we can talk through all those specifics. But I will open the floor for questions about Heritage Capital Project fundamentals.
We had a question about prevailing wage, the wage requirement is if we had any information on that. I responded briefly in the chat, but you can elaborate a little bit.
Okay. Um, so, um, WSHS is not a regulatory agency. So we have sort of limited information about the functioning of L&I, labor and industries. We have been working with them to put information in the guidelines about prevailing wage. So essentially what needs to happen is that you register yourself, your organization, and your project in their system. And then your contractor is supposed to also register in the system and get connected with your project. And then your contractor is required to report, well, sign an affidavit saying we will pay prevailing wage, and then upload reports, I think monthly, of the wages they've paid to attest that they've paid prevailing wage. It's complicated. I have had pretty good success with their with emailing their PW1 email address, which is in the guidelines. It's the help email that they recommend. Sorry, was there a specific question about prevailing wage? That's just the general procedures that
I
I
think the question
understand.
was just if we had any resources.
Oh, yeah, the not particularly outside of the information, the guidelines. I know that LNI does some trainings. I attended one once, um, and they're pretty dense, and they're more. I think the one I attended was designed for awarding agencies, which, or maybe it was designed for contractors. I can't remember. But we can look up and see if they have any trainings coming up, and share
Come
that
pretty
information
regularly.
out.
But this is
Yeah.
important for you to know for planning purposes because all your contractors that are quoting your projects right now need to know that they need to quote it using prevailing wages,
Yeah.
so you
Yeah.
don't get stuck with a surprise later on.
Yeah.
And there's stuff coming in the chat if you want to take a look at that.
Okay. Well, until I see a hand raise or hear someone jump in, I will just go ahead and kind of speak some of the chat questions out loud. A historic house turned into museum qualify. Yes, definitely. That is something that we fund a lot of. What date will the contracts be finalized for this proposal process? Lauren, I'm not totally sure what you mean. The contract comes after the proposal. So the proposal gets submitted, your eligibility happens, and then your full proposal is submitted in June of this year. The contract is if you are awarded a grant by the legislature, we have a template, which is also in the guidelines. It's in the end, kind of just a template. We'll input all your project information into that template, including the detailed scope of work. And then once that contract is signed, which at the very earliest can be July 1st, 2027, we do, after the grants are awarded, we do what we call a pre-contract questionnaire. We ask each awardee to sort of let us know how urgent it is. So essentially, how far past July 1st, 2027, like, do you need to get started on grant expenses, and try to get those contracts drafted first, because some folks are like, I need to start right away, or I'm already in process and I'm running out of match cushion here. I need to start being able to count some of these dollars as grant funds. So we try to process those first. And some folks are like, oh, we're not starting until next spring in 2028. And that's totally fine too. Lauren, did that answer your question? Okay, I see a nod. Thanks, Lauren. And David put that in the chat too. And the prevailing wage question. Holly asks, can costs of projects which are adjacent to the historic resource on the same site, such as a major landscape renovation, be used within the match, even though not within the building footprint? And then David says the scope should make sense as a distinct project and not a collection of deferred maintenance or small disparate projects. But I think perhaps another angle of that is that site work is an eligible project as long as it's related to the building itself. So whether that's landscaping, a parking lot, utility work, as long as it's in service of the facility itself. I would say typically those proposals that are not directly related to a building wouldn't make a compelling application in and of itself to just do a parking lot, for instance. But if you're spending a lot of money on a parking lot and then doing some rehab to the building also, that parking lot could definitely count as match and part of the whole project itself. Yeah, we'll go with Hannah. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for all this. Question relating to the public access piece of this grant. If the grant funded project is part of a building that requires a fee for admission, is that still considered public access?
Yeah, that's totally fine. A lot of museums have, and ticketed entry, things like that. Mostly it needs to be beyond, like, we do get some applications for, historic buildings that are pretty exclusively privately, whether that's rented to nonprofit offices or art studios or something like that, and that's just not really public access in the same way. So yeah, it can be ticketed access for sure. Great question. All right, Margaret, you are muted. Oh, well, you're not muted. I see you're not muted, but the sound is not coming through, Margaret. All right. So bad that she's taking all this time describing her question. Margaret, we can't hear you. I see that you're not muted, but we can't hear you. Might be a microphone setting.
Oh,
Nope, there we go. We can hear you now.
oh,
Okay. Sorry, you're gonna have to start over.
okay, sorry. So, because of the awarding of the funding being about a year, so you submitted a proposal with a project in mind. How are changes to the project that may have been unforeseen that come up? Let's say a funder comes forth for part of the project, so you no longer need new windows. But you still need to have ADA accessible elevator. So how are things like that handled because of the length of time and the changes that come up during that time?
Absolutely wonderful question, Margaret. Thank you for that. Well, first of all, I hope those new windows are now part of your match that you're using for your project. But ultimately, we will work with you to make adjustments. And so, what kind of the principle that we use is kind of what is the legislative intent of what is funded through the legislature. And we basically send the legislature like a summary of what the project is. And so and also obviously we have the panel that reviews your application. So I'll give you a good example of a change that we were not able to make, or a change that was requested, and two scenarios. So we had an applicant request funding to a museum to build a new building for the collections, and there were issues with the budget, and they said, well, can we instead use this money to just purchase the building that our museum is in now because it was owned by the county, I think, or the city, and there was an opportunity to purchase it, and we thought our determination was that no, the purpose of the grant was for that expansion of the footprint and for the protection of the collections. Even though purchasing the museum building would have been an excellent, worthy endeavor, the intention was not that. And so they said, well, what if we purchased a building across the street? Instead of building a new building, we purchased an existing building and used that for our collections. And that we said yes to. That you're still expanding the footprint, even though it's not the exact project that your proposal had put forward, but it is still the purpose and the intent of the application. So in the case of something a little bit smaller, where it's windows and roof and like some of these different components, if you need to kind of remove and add different building components to a scope of work where the intent is to rehabilitate a building, and to either provide access or to make the building essentially more sound, more weatherproof, things like that. We have some flexibility to kind of moderate what those specific components are, and not just in that year between your application and the day you're able to start spending grant funds, but also the 2 years that you are spending grant funds. If changes come up, there's a lot of unknown unknowns, especially with historic buildings. You never know what's in that wall until you open it up and find out. So we're able to work with you. And another example is when we actually just had this happen, where an applicant had proposed some design work and some construction work in their budget, and then the design work ended up being a lot more expensive than they thought. So we moved a bunch of the funds over to the design work, and we're able to support their project that way, because the intent is still the same project, and still the same intent. So great question, Margaret. Every project is a little different in how we assess that, but we want to work with you to make the project work, because otherwise the money goes back to the general fund, and we don't want that. We want the money going to history projects. So we'll make it work.
Thank you so much.
All right. Let's see, I'm going to go back to
Peggy.
Peggy.
Mm-hmm. I think that's where we left off on the chat.
Oh, thank you. I was like, I don't see Peggy raising their hand.
No.
Peggy, do we have any firm info about the amount of state funding committed for B29? Oh, Peggy, what a great question. As I understand, well, it is $10 million. We have been having some internal conversations here about the fact that 10 million is really insufficient for the amount of need that we are seeing. And we had over 18 million in requests last round. So we have been discussing putting forward some agency request legislation to update the RCW. Right now it's capped at that 10 million, and we would love to see that, well, Building for the Arts is at 18, so at least commensurate with Building for the Arts, maybe even 20, just a nice round number there. And that doesn't mean that the legislature has to fund that much. It just means that we're able to submit to them up to that much of the projects that we receive that we would recommend to them. So that and the 2-to-1 match. We think this program would be a lot more accessible if that were reduced to a 1-to-1 match. And so we've been having those conversations internally, and we would like to propose some of those changes through agency legislation. That won't happen this session, which is actually kind of nearing the end, but we would like to gear up to submit that for consideration next session. Unfortunately, that will be too late, probably, to apply for this round, because we'll have already submitted the list of 10 million back in September. Just this really elongated schedule, unfortunately, has some pretty significant drawbacks. So, Peggy, the answer is currently 10 million, but we are going to do our best for that not to be the case in the future. We would love to see that go up because the need is really there, and capital expenses went up during the pandemic and have not really gone back down. So it is rough out there. It is rough out there. Okay, Lisa asks, if property has been transferred from a federal source, what documentation is needed? Can a professional assessor provide evaluation? Yes. So you would need documentation of the value through either your county's assessment, which can sometimes be a little lower than what a market assessment might be, or you can get a professional appraisal done, and we will count that number if it happens to be higher than what the county says, or the sale price, which in your case, it sounds like a transfer, there would be no sale. But for other people looking at property acquisition, the sale price could also count as the value. So a few different ways. So for you, Lisa, I would just, whatever transfer document you have from the, whatever legal agreement that transfer produced, plus the county assessor's page from your county website or a professional appraisal. Those two components together showing that the property changed hands and what the value is, even if you didn't buy it. We would have those two documents working together in tandem to demonstrate that value. Great question. All right, Katie, can you please clarify whether Heritage Capital Project awards are typically granted as full funding for a project scope or if partial funding is more common? I would say partial funding is not common. The panel just has really shied away from partial funding because they know that if you're trying to plan out a capital project, a specific scope of work, and you get, a third or a half of what you've asked for, I mean, that can really just cause chaos in a project. And so last year I mentioned that we had over 18 million in requests. And so we did look at doing like 70% or 60%, across more projects than the sort of top ranked chunk, so that we could have the money go further. And the panel just really did not think that would be wise. They would rather fully fund fewer projects than try to spread things out across more projects, and create some of that budget confusion and difficulty across projects. Because ultimately, our goal is to see the projects happen and be completed. And if we're only giving partial funding, that makes that really hard. So typically, I would say partial funding is not typical. With the exception of if you're at the spot where the 10 million runs out in the ranking, we'll just give you whatever's left, which can be close to what you asked for or not close to what you asked for. Poor City of Olympia got, I think, 80,000 of their $1 million request last time because they were right on the edge there. But okay, Margaret asks, due to the grant process being about a year, we already talked about this. Okay, moving to Elizabeth's question. Can you describe the application experience for an organization? How intensive is the work related to other capital grants? Do you have a sense of how many organizations this project will fund? Okay, so, and I'm happy to we're at 2:00 actually. Let me just pull up my calendar real quick. Yeah, I'm happy to stay on for another little while to continue answering questions, but if any of you all have to hop off, I perfectly understand. I would say the application experience is fairly typical with one exception. And that is that we ask for quite a bit of documentation on your matching income. And this isn't until phase 2. Other capital or grant projects will ask if there's a match required, or sometimes even if there isn't, they'll ask for other, other investments into the project. They'll just ask you to like list where, like, what are the grants you've gotten, or like what donors or other income you're using to pay or to go toward the project. And we actually ask for documentation of that. So this is all spelled out in the guidelines, and we'll go over it in the stage 2 workshop. But essentially, if you have a grant, if you're counting another grant, we need to see an award letter or a check for that grant. If it's a major donor, we need to see evidence that you received that cash. So that piece is, I think, more work than other grant applications I've seen. Otherwise, I think the application information that we request is fairly typical. Design, planning documents, estimates. We require at least one estimate for each scope component that you're proposing. And actually, that's a good note to mention now. We don't require like a multiple bid, like for some public money, there has to be multiple bids and different things like that. We don't require that for this grant program. You just have to have one. And you are not required to use anyone you get a bid from that you submit with your application. You're not required to continue with them through the life of your project. You can, if something happens, you need to switch contractors, switch consultants, you can do that. But we do need to have a bid in the application phase so that the panel can see that a professional has given an estimate of what this actual project will cost to justify that amount that you're requesting in grant funds. Because obviously we can't visit every single project in person, and nor would I have an expertise, particularly to assess anything myself. So we do need at least one professionally developed bid. If we have accepted, estimates from internal folks with facilities experience. I think those aren't quite as strong, and the panel recognizes that. We've accepted them though, so that's a little bit of a risk you take if you're generating cost estimates internally. We've accepted it from people with experience, but like I say, it's a bit of a risk. And then the second half of Elizabeth's question was, in your best estimation, do you have a sense of how many organizations will fund? So typically it's between around 25 to 30. Last year it was 19, or last cycle, I should say. 2 years ago it was 19. And that is because of the projects that ranked the highest, there were several $1 million requests right at the top of the ranking. And that just ate through the funds really, really quickly. And we only got down to about to 19. Poor City of Olympia got a tiny fraction of their request. And that's what I was referring to the panel looking at, like, funding 75%. But unfortunately, right at that cutoff, there were like 3 more $1 million projects. And so the spreading out was not really getting us down the list very far. So part of our adjustments to the criteria was actually with this in mind, because a lot of those large $1 million projects are for buildings that are eligible and should be eligible and that we want to fund, but are maybe not quite as directly tied to public access to history. So for instance, it's a historic theater. Incredible, wonderful, fantastic resource, but it's not providing any history programming necessarily. And so we don't want to, they're still eligible, but we wanted to raise up that lifelong learning and the weight of those scores. We wanted to give that a little bit more prominence in the scoring. And so that's why another reason why we adjusted some of those criteria was so that some of those smaller history-focused projects could have a little bit more, hopefully, mobility up that ranking list as things go. So in answer to your question, Elizabeth, somewhere between 19 and 36, I think, is the higher end in recent biennia. Stephen, please go ahead.
Hey there. Thank you for doing this. My question is in regards to kind of that ranking. I'm curious on historical building, and there's so many things that we could go for right now that I'm
Yeah.
curious on um, I don't know, what you guys might have any input on what we should be kind of requesting for, maybe.
Can you give me a sense of what
Um, I,
things you're weighing?
yeah, totally. Like, let's say there's an entire revamp of the exterior, siding, painting. It's got lead. Windows probably need to be updated. So we have that maybe in bucket one, and bucket two is like you know, maybe something structurally we need to address. Are you guys bucket one or bucket two, or does it kind of just depend more on the whole picture, or is it
I would,
project based?
yeah, I'm going to give you the probably more frustrating answer, which is the whole picture.
That's okay.
So in addition to the work, that public access to history, how how well you've planned out your project, all those components will go into the consideration and the scoring of your application. So um, for the physical work, I would honestly I would say try to determine priority wise, like what's most critical for the building at this juncture. I mean, it sounds like maybe structural. I mean, I don't want to speak for your project, but typically structural is a pretty important thing. So if I'm trying to get that sorted out first, and I would also recommend that you include that in some of your narrative questions responses of like we are requesting funding for this component so that in the future we can then continue the work and do these components. So like I would give the panel sort of your long-term vision so they know that you're sort of invested for the future of addressing, even if it's going to take a lot of time. Maybe enough time that you could come back in 2029 to 31 and get another grant. That you're invested in that long term piece. So yeah, I would work through the assessment information you have for your building to prioritize what kind of what the greatest need is for the longevity of the building itself.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate the information.
Yeah. All right. Lisa asks documentation for past grants, award letter, copies of checks, contract. All three are fine. For that matching income documentation, we've gotten a little less stringent. Not that we don't require it, but we've in the past kind of said you have to have this piece. But over the years, we've more come to like whatever piece of documentation you have that shows that you got the grant, will accept. So any three of those, a copy of the check, an award letter, or a contract with the other grantor, all three of those are acceptable. And you don't need to send all three, just one. Just one. We'll accept it. Hannah, yeah.
Yeah, hi. I think I know the answer to this, but just triple checking. If we don't have an active grant, but we are still under the monitoring period for Heritage Capital, confirming we're eligible for this round.
Yes, sorry, Hannah. I saw your email. I have been swamped with another project, but correct. So Hannah is referring to a clause in the guidelines that says that you can only have basically two open appropriations at one time. And the short answer, Hannah, is yes, you are eligible because monitoring does not count. So what that means is if you've applied for an HCP grant and you've received it in the past and you've gotten a contract and you're working on that project and then you're like, oh man, because this timeline is so long and I can see I'm going to need another grant. And here we are at the application phase for the next cycle. I'm going to go ahead and apply for more, even though I'm still actively working on my contract for the current biennium, or I'm speaking as if I were in the past. And you did apply for another one and you were granted another one. First off, we're not going to let you contract for the second one until you finish the first one. And the other rule is that we're not going to let you apply for yet a third one until you finish that first one too. So you can basically only have one awarded grant in the hopper, so to speak, out there, not two. We've gotten into some situations where organizations have stacked up a little too far. And like by the, 6 years later, like things have just changed, and like it's too far out to really honor. Often it's too far out to honor the original intent. What we'd rather you do is wait till you're actually ready to move a project forward before you're applying for the funds. So Hannah is referring to once you're in that monitoring period, you've finished your project. Does that count as having an open appropriation? No, that does not. So once a project is completed, that is off the table. You're good to go to apply for a new one, and even up to one additional new grant if you're still actively doing project work. All right. Brianna in the chat asks if TAP needs to be consulted if the building is not considered a historic structure. It depends on what you mean by considered a historic structure. Can you, if it's younger than 40 years, you don't need to consult with TAP. But if it's basically 40 or more, typically we do require you to confirm that it's not considered historic. Can you elaborate a little bit, Brianna, on your building?
Yeah.
Maybe Brianna had to hop off.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are.
So thanks, Jay. So our building, I think, is right at the threshold. I believe this year it turns 39 years old. So in the cycle, it would be over 40, but currently, as it sits, it is not. So what is your take on that?
I would probably say no. It doesn't need to be considered. I don't know, David, if you disagree with that. I mean, unless I were to look at photos of your building and be like, ooh, we should really consider this. Because ultimately you do, remain under contract with us, or the effects of the contract remain in place for up to 13 years. So you'll definitely be passing that 50-year threshold in the life of the grant itself. So Brianna, I'd say maybe if you want to maybe send me a couple of photos or connect with me over email, we can help you navigate that.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Okay, Lisa asks, are funds from the licensed environmental program Lighthouse license plates considered state funding? Yes, they are. We had that question last cycle and went through a whole process to try to figure that out. And yes, they are considered state funds, even though that grant is managed by a nonprofit. They are collected through the Department of Licensing, which is a state agency. And so the origin of those funds is state funding. Okay, Judy Scott, thank you. I have questions, but we'll contact you later. Great, look forward to it. Katie, can you please clarify whether Heritage Capital Project awards are typically granted as full funding for project scope or partial funding? We've chatted about that one. Folks having to hop off. If awarded funding for a facility or specific property, will HCP require some variation of a use lien? No, it's not a lien. So all you have with us is a contract which stipulates that you will maintain the public use for 13 years past project completion. And so Sorry, just so the requirement that we have is not a lien, it's a contract that, so if you don't fulfill the terms of the contract, then you have to repay the grant. So that is the stipulation with a 13-year monitoring past project completion. If you break the contract at any point in those 13 years, then you're required to pay back the state the grant. All right. Bob asks, can phased projects be eligible? And if so, do future phases have to go through application process? Does the award for one phase impact future funding? I'm not totally sure I'm understanding your question. So future phases would only impact if you are also going to apply for a grant in the future. As I mentioned to Stephen, I think it's valuable to kind of give a little bit of information in your application about what your future plans are. If it is a phased project, this is what we're applying for, and these are some of our future plans. But you're not being, there's no sort of accountability that you'll be held to in that. I mean, we're asking for just best information about your project. But yes, I mean, phasing itself is totally fine. And then like I say, just provide a little bit of information. And I would say the only way that an application would be affected in the future is that, no, I can't really think, because any application you made in the future, you would have to follow all the same rules and standards. And so it would just be like a continuation of that. Your 13 years then gets bumped out a couple of years if you apply for another one. Did that answer your question, Bob? Okay, I'm seeing some nodding. Good. And I see David kind of also responded to you in the chat. Okay, Jim asks, our project is building a railroad track that our volunteers will build themselves, not a contractor at prevailing rate. Is this possible for our project? Our grant request, grant purchase railroad track is less than 100,000. Yeah, so as David said in the chat, if you are doing all volunteer labor, and your grant is under 100,000 or under, yes, that can work. Volunteer labor is valued at, I think it's 41 or 42. I forget 41. Which one it is. 41. This round, we reference a nonprofit that sort of estimates the value of labor in each state. Washington actually tends to be on the higher side. And so it's been going up the last few years. So yeah, your volunteer labor can add up real quick. I will say, this is very important, that labor has to be tracked. You can't just say, oh, last month we spent about 100 hours. It has to be tracked on some type of timesheet, and there has to be some note about what work was done, because we have to confirm that the time spent was related to the scope that is in your contract. So the Washington State Auditor's Office is very thorough. And when our program gets audited, which happens every maybe 2 or 3 years, they want to see that we are only granting funds with proper documentation. And when volunteer funds are used as match, that counts. Any match or grant funds all have to have proper documentation and what we call auditable documentation that shows what is being counted as an expense, who spent it, who donated it, and how much it was. So if you are looking to count past volunteer labor that you did not record thoroughly with timesheets, please talk to us because we don't want you counting a bunch of labor that you can't document as part of a match for a project moving forward. So we will do our best to work with you on that, maybe some version of documentation that you could count. But if the documentation is not there, we can't count it. It has to be auditable by the auditor's office.
Okay, I have a follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
I'd like to also know, by the time this cycle begins in 2027, we will have already laid track to get our project going.
Yeah.
Are we going to be behind here when we do that? Because we've already started the project, and you said we can't start the project until July of 2027.
No, I said you can't start spending grant dollars until July of 27. So your match can be up to 6 years previous. So
work can begin then.
That is not grant funded. That is only match. Correct. Only match can begin now.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if you got volunteers working right now, have them fill out timesheets. And
we do.
have a great. We have a sample timesheet in the guidelines, but any sort of version that your organization uses that tells us the date, the person's name, the number of hours that they worked, and a very brief note of what they worked on is sufficient in any format that works for you. We have some folks that have digital stuff, some folks have handwritten stuff. Any version that works for you.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Is there information on what grants got funded somewhere last cycle? David provided an Excel spreadsheet, but I will also throw in the chat. There's a spot on our website of program history, and you can take a look at that. And under each of those cycle drop downs, there's the ranking list.
Yeah, that's actually the link.
What?
To that. That's the link to our history site.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Oh, well. Oh, I see.
Did you?
The history site that I linked to lists multiple years. David listed the last cycle, which is great too. Obviously, the most recent. Okay, lots of things. Okay, I think we got through everything in the chat. That was a good question session. Any other questions come up as we were talking through more details? Okay. Well, and I forgot to put in the chat the registration links for the other workshops, but hopefully you will all be joining us at the next workshop, the eligibility review workshop, on the 17th, March 17th, in about a couple weeks, where we'll go into more depth. I'll screen share the application form, and we'll walk through everything in more detail. So thank you everyone for attending. I'm going to go ahead and close us out. If you would like to speak about there's the registration link. Thank you, David. If you would like to speak about your project specifically and any of this particulars, please reach out to me or David. Probably me. I more handle things on the application and the contracting end, and then as David said, he works more with the reimbursement side of things after you've already got a contract. So thanks everybody. Looking forward to another round of applications and looking forward to working with all of you, and we'll see you later.